Hello, I'm Delaney Ruston, primary care physician and creator with Lisa Tabb of the 4 Screenagers movies. And this is Parenting in the Screen Age, a show about discovering the best ways to help our youth and ourselves navigate our rapidly changing digital world. Today I'm joined by Christopher Pepper, a longtime San Francisco teacher who has led young men's health groups, and Joanna Schroeder, a journalist who has written extensively about gender and parenting. And together they've co-authored the brand new book called Talk with Your Boys, 16 conversations to help tweens and teens grow into confident, caring young men. It's a really practical book, and I really recommend it. And it's just been featured on CNN, and it's been in a lot of other outlets. In our conversation, we're going to dive into ways parents can really connect with their sons around technology use and social life online. We talk about opening up conversations about masculinity, navigating online interactions, and dealing with online cruelty, things that can feel really tricky but are just so important to be talking about. And Chris and Joanna, they share specific strategies that you can put into practice right away. And I think you're going to find these to be really helpful. And let me note that this is part 1 of my talk with Christopher and Joanna. And the next episode will have part 2, where we talk about boys and online sports betting, issues around extremist groups trying to recruit boys, and other topics. And before we start today's episode, just a quick shout out to our brand new campaign called Screen Free Sleep, all about getting screens out of kids' bedrooms during sleep time. We would love you to check out screenfreesleep.org because there are cool videos about what we're providing to help you bring this to your kids in your home and to your community, like getting your child's elementary school to help get other parents on board. So check it out. Okay, so now on to the show.
Okay. So I want to start by asking you guys just to say a little bit about how your work has translated into your wanting to do this book. I'll start with you, Christopher.
Sure. I'm a teacher in San Francisco schools and have been for more than 20 years. I work with all kinds of students, but one of the things that's happened in my job over the last decade is that I've started coordinating a program for boys, specifically a set of young men's health groups in both middle schools and high schools, and have learned a lot in that process of coordinating these groups. They were set up initially to really focus on sexuality education and HIV prevention. But what I learned was that boys were really interested in talking about emotions, with connecting with one another. They often said, "Oh, no one's ever asked me about what it means to be a man today, or what it's like to be a boy today, or asked me these kind of questions about masculinity." And they're really interested and engaged in talking and wanting to talk about those things.
Yeah, as a journalist who was writing about issues related to gender and boys and girls, I would write about something that related to girls, and people would resonate with people. This is probably in the early 2010s. But when I started writing about issues facing boys back then, I got such enormous, overwhelming response from those, from men and from parents. So men would say things like, "Nobody ever thinks to talk about this. Nobody even thinks that we need to parent boys well," which was absolutely wild revelation. And the more I wrote about parenting, the more I realized people aren't talking about this, and it's really, really serious, especially when I started looking at the ways in which boys were behaving and receiving messages online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. There's such a disparity of books related to boys and parenting compared to girls.
I started writing about and reporting on issues facing all kids around 2011, 2012, and really started focusing on boys just a few years later. Then I went and became an editor at the Good Men Project, and that's when it became glaringly obvious that there was something missing in how we were talking about parenting, and that was almost any discussion about boys and how to raise healthy, happy boys.
And can you say a little bit of what the Good Men Project is, just big picture?
Yeah. And I no longer work there. I was there for 5 years, but the Good Men Project was a bit of a literary experiment in writing. It was a lot about emotional wellness. Mm-hmm. And because I had a degree from UCLA in gender studies and some degree of focus in masculinity, and I was a writer and an editor, it was a perfect fit. And it really became a passion project for all of us at the time to make sure we were saying, hey, guys have feelings too. Hey, guys need friends too. And even adult men.
Fantastic. Your book, Talk to Your Boys, 16 Conversations to Help Tweens and Teens Grow into Confident, Caring Young Men. Wonderful title. We're not going to get to all 16 today, but I do really want to focus on conversations that relate to the digital age. One thing is that we often feel like our kids and our teens are like doing nothing when they're on their screens. And I wondered if either of you could talk a little bit about how we can think about this a little differently.
I have an example that might be of interest to you. I one time walked into my son's room. He may have been 14 or 15, and he was doing that thing you see the kids do, lying back on his bed, phone right here in front of his face. And he just looked like he was doing nothing. I assumed he was, I don't know what I assumed. And I was like, you know what? You have got things to do. Whatever you're doing on here is not important. Aren't you supposed to be doing homework? Shouldn't you be out? All the things we all say. And he kind of shooed me away, and I was really mad. And I found out after he was done with that conversation that he was having a friend who was having a bit of a mental health crisis. And that person had come to him to talk about what they were feeling and trying to figure out what to do next. And I felt so bad. I really had assumed he was playing a game or talking about nothing or leaving comments. And it was actually something really serious. And he was absolutely doing the right thing.
Christopher, do you want to say more about that?
I think that it is good to be curious about that is one of the phrases we try to introduce in the book is get curious, not furious. And I think for a lot of parents, me included, when we have an agenda, we want to sit down to dinner at a certain time, or we want to get on with our plans for the day, and our child is playing video games or they're on their phone, and we ask them to move things along, and they don't necessarily follow the plan, or they're not as quick about it as we would like. It can be super frustrating.
During our research, we had a group of over 80 boys ages 12 to 22 that gave us feedback on all sorts of aspects of their lives that normally people don't even ask them about, including gaming. One thing that we learned from that and outside research is that gaming and some forms of social media are how our boys decompress from the stresses of their lives. It is an important tool for managing their emotions and their stress levels. Of course, that can become misused. It can become maladaptive, but so many of our boys on our panel reflected that back to us. Like, when I get home from school, my parents want to talk to me, or they want me to get to chores, they want me to do homework, and I need to zone out for a half an hour or an hour, and then I feel so much better after. And parents need to keep that in mind.
I think that's a great point. I mean, something else that you guys talk about is just things that even if they tell us what they're doing on their phones at that time might not seem important to us. Clearly what your son was doing in helping a friend is something we would all relate to as essential. But even things that we might just dismiss could be really important in their way of thinking about things. I also like the idea, it came to mind as you guys were saying things, is that assume the best. So that in that moment, our brain just goes to they're wasting time. What are they doing? It's like, what if we just had that, okay, take a breath. I'm going to assume the best. I'm just going to assume that it's important to them. I'm going to assume these things so that I can calm my amygdala and maybe be more effective in how I'm going to communicate next with them.
So much of that has become private with headphones, with small devices that people are watching in their rooms with the door closed, that we have to do a lot more work to really understand what those aspects of their lives are like, and recognize like those are central parts of kids' lives now. And to really know our kids and stay engaged with them, we have to stay engaged with that technology and be curious about what they're looking at and try to learn about it as much as we can and get them to show us what is so compelling about it.
Yeah.
And there really is a fine balance there, because sometimes my husband will be in the background when I'm looking at my phone going, what are you watching? What's that about? What are you doing? And I get like so overstimulated.
Exactly. Yes.
And so I have to remember with my kids that while I want to and I need to be involved in what they are doing, I also know from an objective standpoint that being annoying gets us nowhere.
Yes. And subjectively, it's amazing as an adult if somebody looks over your shoulder and say, what are you doing? And you could just be writing a grocery list. There's something about it, this space that is
Yes.
very primal, that we immediately feel somehow intruded upon. And so that's why we're big advocates for Tech Talk Tuesdays, some way to create once a week or however the family does it, so it's not in the moment, because those conversations are much less effective.
Before we dive back in, I wanted to let you know about our 4 Screenagers documentaries, which focus on helping kids and teens navigate the challenges of this digital age. We created these films to be screened in schools and at community events. Over 20,000 hosts have shown them thus far. Along with the movies, we provide discussion guides, promotional materials, and other tools so that you can easily organize a truly impactful event for your community. And if your school wants to use the movies in the classroom, we have options for that too, along with a full curriculum of lesson plans designed for various grade levels. To learn more about the movies or inquire about becoming a host, visit screenagersmovie.com. There's a link in the show notes. Now back to the show.
I want to get to the idea about conversations about social cruelty, bullying. I really like the point that you guys bring about interrupters, because we often want boys to stand up. We want them to be upstanders and all of that. But they see and hear all sorts of things that they know aren't in alignment with values of the family. What ideas do you want to give parents about how to help boys think about how to respond when there's conflict and social cruelty?
We really have a lot of prompts in the book for adults to think about their own values and get clear about what their actual beliefs are. So I think that's an important step for any adult to take. First is to just get clear about what do you believe about how other people should treat each other, and how much do you think folks should intervene if they do hear something that's offensive or racist or sexist.
What might you say to your child in that regard? You're like, what's an example of you talking about your values with them about that?
Sure. So to say in our family, we think that all people deserve to have equal chances to participate in things, and that insulting people because of who they are, because of characteristics that are essential to who they are, is not okay. Like calling people names, using slurs, insulting people, making fun of people's voices or accents, things like that. That is not okay. And I'm going to be really upset if I hear you doing those things. And to actually have those conversations. I think sometimes adults maybe believe those things, but they never explicitly say them, or they don't say them very often. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that is sort of a repeated theme in my communication with boys, is that we actually want to know what the adults in our lives think, and we want to hear from them regularly about what they would do in situations or what they believe, and that carries a lot of weight. We sometimes think teenagers don't care about what we say, or they don't value our opinions, and that is not true. That you as a caring adult in a kid's life can have a lot of sway, and they should really be clear about what your beliefs are and what your opinions are about important ways, especially about how to treat other people.
And we found it's really troubling for kids when they don't know the difference between something that is naughty or not allowed and something that is hurtful or harmful. And a lot of parents assume that it's clear. It's clear that they shouldn't say racist slurs or homophobic words. That's clear, and it's bad. But a lot of the kids we talk to have found themselves in positions where they may be saying like a homophobic slur because everyone else is saying it, and kind of equating it with saying, a naughty word, a bad word, a swear word. And what ends up happening is they end up in situations where they are hurting someone else without really realizing how or why. They need those dots connected for them. So I believe that you need to sit down and be very explicit about it. Mm-hmm. These are the swear words that you get in trouble if you say in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Here are some words that you may not say in the classroom that you may think are funny in the locker room or with your friends, or you'll hear other people say. And I want to explain to you why they are so hurtful, a little bit of the historical context, and how someone, let's explore together, how someone might feel if they heard you say that or read it in a group chat or in a comment. Let's talk about how they might feel. So they start making that distinction and connecting the dots between words and someone else's feelings early on. I believe people should start having these conversations with their kids probably around 5th grade.
Yeah. even if they're not on any technology conversations at this point. Absolutely. I want to flag two things that you both said. Christopher, I think that it is wonderful that you said share examples of what you would do, because so often, particularly for teens, it comes off as our telling them how they should act. Using all sorts of approaches is great. So I learned about this conversation that was happening, and gosh, this is how I would have handled it. And leave it at that. Don't always then ask a kid. I know we're supposed to ask them lots of questions, but it's not always. And what do you think? What would you do? Sometimes just it's all these different ways of getting the messages. And then Joanna, I just wanted to say that I think that really is wonderful to really, and your book has examples of specific things that we want to flag, and how the context and the words and the historical perspectives on all of this is so important to help them understand it and think about the emotions. Even if they don't say what they think the person would feel, you've planted that in their brain that they'll be thinking about. The idea of interrupters. So I know from many parents who I've worked with that their sons were in group chats where things were going amiss, that there's one or two in particular of the boys who are saying provocative and often unkind and inappropriate things. What could be examples of on that online chat we could be talking to our boys about how they might handle those things?
I have always emphasized that even a simple thing like that's not cool goes a long way. The kid can go in a private DM with the kid that's causing the problem, just be like, that's not cool. Or like, I find that really annoying. I don't like when you do that, or like, that's so mean, and just have that discussion one-on-one so it doesn't have to become a big group thing. And that's easy to do in text because you're not pulling a guy aside.
Mm-hmm.
You're going off on your own. Amazingly, they may not think of that themselves, which is why we are trying to be explicit about it. And it's not that they're not smart. It's just they are still kids.
Yeah.
And once we remind them about the specifics of how to handle something, it tends to get better. Now, in a group situation, including on a live video game, if you're playing in an open world game with strangers or with friends, sometimes just saying a quick thing in distraction immediately after can be helpful. So someone says something racist, you can just be like, don't be racist. And then, hey, look over here at this other thing. And sometimes that may not shut down the racist person. But if someone is in the game whose feelings may have been hurt, who might feel unsafe, who might have something going on in their own life, at least they've heard someone say, yes, that was racist and I don't like that here. And it can help someone feel a little bit less alone. And then you immediately move on to a distraction.
Yeah.
So that the attention doesn't necessarily go right straight back to you.
Yeah.
And you can lean on the technology a little bit, because a lot of these games actually have some kind of filtering that looks for specific words that either people are typing or even saying out loud. And you can be like, don't say racist stuff, we're going to get banned from this game.
Oh, I like that
or
too.
You could say,
yeah.
Or one step further would be, I don't like it, and it's going to get us banned from this game.
That is really great. And I like just starting to use the word interrupter at the family table, talking about these things, and be like, oh, that sounds like that would have been an interrupter, call for an interrupter. And then there's just so many different ways to do it. Even doing that direct message is an interrupter. Putting it on the technology is an interrupter. So their brain can start just getting more clever about different ways of just moving the conversation to a different way. And I think that's important. We really advocate for particularly kids, if they're playing group video games, to not have headphones on. And a parent can be an interrupter, just to say, hey, no, you guys know I'm listening. Doesn't have to be a lecture. It's just like, I'm here. And when something gets said inappropriately, it's a wonderful way to remind them, I should be more aware of what I'm saying.
For kids, when their parents step in and say things like that, could be embarrassing, but it also gives them an out and someone to blame in the future. Like, hey, my dad is here and he won't let me play if people are talking like that. And that passes the buck on to the dad as well.
Reminding them over and over again that the people they're playing with are people, because it's easy to forget that you're playing with a group, and that group they're not in the room with you. So it's easy to forget that they're other young people. And when somebody says like, "Oh, you suck, you should go kill yourself," which are the kind of words that often get thrown around when somebody's not performing well in a game, that can land really deeply for, a teenager who's having a bad day and they're coming home and trying to relax by playing this game, and then things aren't going well there either, and somebody jumps on them, or a group of people kind of dogpile on them. So just reminding them like, hey, these are other kids just trying to get through their day, and they have feelings just like you have feelings.
We don't know what their life and their struggles are.
Mhm.
And that's such a huge important thing to emphasize, is whoever you're leaving a comment on their social media, or whoever you're talking to online, you don't know what they're going through in their own family and in their own home. And it's better to assume that you could be triggering something that you would regret later on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really another good message that we could just be saying over and over. As for us parents, assume the best until we get curious, because the key is showing respect and getting curious, but to soothe ourselves. And then I love this other point is we don't know what's going on in other people's lives, and actually maybe assume it's harder than we think it is, and that can impact the way that we communicate. You guys cite really interesting data that only 2% of parents have insight into their son doing social cruelty when they actually are. Do parents actually have any clue that that's happening, that their own child is doing repeated cruelty?
To me, this really gets tied into the idea of masculinity and how do you perform, how do you show that you're a man, how do you show that you're tough. And as boys are growing up and starting to develop their identity in the world and thinking a lot about how other people see them, that kind of cruelty is often, it's a show for other people. It's to show that, hey, I'm tough, I'm better than these other people, I can be the person who throws the best insults or gets the biggest laugh at somebody else's expense. And we really encourage adults to have a lot of conversations about what it means to be a man, what it, is with boys who are growing up and thinking about what kind of man do you want to be in the world. That should be an active conversation, something that you really talk about a lot, that you're looking around in the world for examples of people who are being men without being cruel to other people, and to have those be ongoing rich conversations, because I do think a lot of that surface level cruelty comes from this idea that that's how men treat each other. And sometimes it is like there is a rich culture of people, sort of teasing and lightly teasing each other in person, sometimes in a way that's very affectionate. And, that can be fun sometimes. With teenage boys, I often see that they don't know where that line is. So they're joking around, they're teasing each other, and they're mocking each other. And it's affectionate at first, and then it goes too far, and then there's a fight. So understanding those lines is a very complex kind of understanding. You have to be very sensitive to other people. And it works best with people that you know really well. And often people are trying to tease each other in a situation where they don't know the other person very well, where people are not very secure in themselves, and it often doesn't go very well. So I usually, with teenage boys, I encourage them, like, just be straightforward, be sincere. If you like somebody's shoes, like, tell them you like their shoes, joke around about things that are not based on making fun of another person. It'll go a lot better.
And I always say a great opportunity to catch ourselves modeling what to do in the heat of the moment, whether you're joking or you're angry, is to watch ourselves while we're driving. And this is probably especially important for the men who are listening, who are raising boys, that we understand we're in the car and someone cuts us off and we swear at them, we call them an idiot, or what is this a-hole do? Like all the things that we say because we know the windows are up and we're just letting it fly, right? That so normalizes a type of language in regards to someone else that we would never use if they cut us off in the grocery store line or at a restaurant. We would never say it, but they hear us say it. If you drive with them a lot and you have a habit of doing that, you are likely teaching them how to talk to other people when they're mad. And with our kids, the times when they're mad are often online and on video games. And when they're facing someone face to face, they think, oh, this could get me punched in the face. And when they're online, they let it rip. And I think we can pause for a moment when we're driving. If you're like that, bad word, bad word, bad word, we can pause and be like, you know what? I should not have said that. I don't actually know that guy. That freaked me out because he cut us off, but that was not the right reaction. I'm sorry I did that. I'm actually really trying not to do that so much because that's not who I want to be. It's not what I want to do in the world. And saying something like that, especially if you're a man, shows your kid that we can pause and take a breath and do something differently. And it doesn't always have to be aggressive or overly defensive.
I think that's beautiful. I'm thinking of a man that I know who, in front of his teen boy, drops a lot of F-bombs. Not to the son, but just uses it a lot. And it's hard for me. I want to say something, but I suspect the dad's going to get defensive no matter how I say it.
And we forget that the adolescent brain is still developing as far as impulse control. So if we are swearing or we are reacting when we're watching sports or anything like that in an explosive way, if we don't want our kids to do that, we need to intervene with ourselves first, because just theoretically, it may take me a half a second to stop myself before I make a bad decision. That kid might not have that half a second. And that's just neuroscience. All that stuff is still developing. All those connections are still being made in that prefrontal cortex. And tempting them by being that way around them, we can't assume that they could pause the way we could when they're actually face to face with someone, or when they're tempted to say something really hurtful to really escalate, and something that may be online that may haunt them forever when someone finds it.
The next episode will have part 2, where we talk about boys and online sports betting, issues around extremist groups trying to recruit boys, and other topics. What a gift that you tuned into the show today. The Screenagers podcast and movement is all about learning together how we can best help our youth of all ages, our communities, and ourselves best navigate our rapidly changing digital world. Make sure to follow/subscribe to the podcast to get each episode automatically, and the more subscribers, the easier it is for others to find us. And if you give it a like and write a review, even just one sentence, that helps even more. Check out Screenagersmovie.com to get resources for each episode and loads of other resources. Learn about our 4 Screenagers films and find my weekly parenting blog, Tech Talk Tuesdays. And be sure to use the search bar to find many topics you might be wondering about among hundreds of my past blogs. Finally, I love hearing from you, so email me at delaney@screenagersmovie.com. What ideas do you want to hear for future episodes? Today's show was produced by the following people: me, your host, Delaney Ruston, Lisa Tabb, and sound editing was done by Alan Gofinski.